Hello, everyone, and welcome to What Idea Do I Work On? I am your host, Carolina Huaranca Mendoza. I know that's a mouthful. So for short, people nickname me Caro. So tremendously excited to have you here. What the focus of this workshop will be, one, to help you unlock a few startup ideas that you have, and secondly, to give you a process by where you can evaluate which one of those startup ideas you're most excited and energized to work on. So let's get started. So a few things to note. This workshop is a labor of love. It came out from my own personal experience. I, once upon a time, used to be a former founder, originally, by the way, from New York. If there are any Peruvians, that's my parents' heritage, but was crazy enough to go through the endeavor of starting a company myself. It was called Spriggle. It failed. That is okay. You learn a lot from failure. So there are a lot of lessons that came from that. But years later, I would be on the other side of the table, and am a venture capitalist at a fund called Kapor Capital. Have left, and now I'm scouting for Lightspeed. But in that entire experience, there are a lot of kind of tips and secrets and learnings that came to me, which is why I wanted to put together this mini course in order to share things I wish I had known before I started a company, and which, by the way, I didn't get at an MBA program because I went to one and I spent a lot of money. School's great, but if I had done it all over again, I may not have made that particular decision. Everything I'll share today are what I call guideposts. They're not absolute. So anytime someone gives you a framework, always feel free to push back on it. So I'm not trying to share frameworks and that these are the only ways to think about startup ideas or how to evaluate them. These are essentially guideposts to help you be thoughtful about your thinking and how you organize. Because I don't think there is a formula to start a company. But I do think there are processes and maybe formulas to think about your startup ideas, okay? And you get what you put in. So that means I tend to be one of those folks that I need to be writing and listening. So for myself, I have a notebook, I have a pen. In some cases, if there are things that you don't know or you don't a term that I may use, make sure to write it down, circle it, highlight it if you need to go back to it. So let's get moving. The first part of what I'm going to share is focused on problem, customer, and solution. And the second, the tail end of this workshop, is going to be around the concept of picking which of the startup ideas you want to hone in on. So one thing that's really important before you even start your entrepreneurial journey, and that frankly, I didn't even think about as much, is know who you are. And what do I mean by that? Well, as a former entrepreneur and also now investor, it's really important to understand why you're picking a particular problem to solve, why you're the right founder to work on this particular startup. And that means doing a lot of internal work. And yes, I never would have thought that myself, but it is really understanding who you are. And what do I mean by that? All of us have superpowers, right? We have things that we're incredibly amazing and passionate about, but we also have areas of improvement. But I think it's really important to take a step back and start companies with intention, which is why I want you all to think about what your superpowers are. So when we think about what those can be for each of us, some may have many superpowers, but I think about it as three circles that all converge. One is around your passion, another is around your strengths, another is around your focus. And how do you know that you have a superpower? Because again, I want to stress that we all do. It's usually something that you're in flow. Or let's say when you're playing a sport, sometimes people talk about being in the zone. If you're a runner or you're playing basketball, when are you in the zone? When are you so focused on something that you can't be distracted because it's just so fun? You kind of want to keep doing it and it doesn't feel like work. Well, that's probably a great indication that's a superpower of yours. And what I'd like you to do, if you can, write some of the superpowers you have now. Just kind of take a little brief moment to write that. But it's important to know that because that's going to anchor you in terms of what problems you likely want to solve. So I have a secret for you. There is a startup idea that has a formula. So I hadn't thought about this before, but after looking through many companies, I realized there's actually a formula for the startup idea. Again, I want to stress, not a formula on how to start a company, but in the way that you describe a startup idea, there's a formula. We're not going to do any math, even though math is my favorite subject. But let me tell you what I mean by this. A startup idea formula, okay, has three different parts. One is the problem and unmet need, which I'm highlighting here in yellow. The other part is the customer, and the other part is solution. So you have these three components. So whenever I refer to what is your startup idea, the way you're telling it to me in a sentence should highlight each of these things. And now it's also important to note that a startup idea is actually a guess. And I'm going to go back to the prior slide. It's a guess on, is this a real problem? It's a guess on, are these customers feeling that problem? And it's a guess on, is this the right solution that these customers want for this problem? And there's a whole type of approach called customer discovery into figuring out those particular tests. We're not going to do that in this particular workshop. What we're going to focus on is just getting to your startup ideas and honing in this concept that there are three components: problem or unmet need, customer, and solution. So like I said, a startup idea is just a guess. You actually don't even know if your startup idea is correct. And the reason we're focusing on problem is because problem is the North Star of everything you do when you start a company. You should always have a problem or an unmet need that you are trying to fulfill or trying to solve. So before any type of incorporation, before you're doing legal paperwork, before you're even writing a line of code, you should speak to customers. And that's this idea of customer discovery, to actually test if all of these things are true. If you're solving a problem or filling an unmet need, if these are the right customers that have that problem, and if the solution is the right solution for these customers to address that problem. Pro tip, don't get confused with problem and need. And I'm going to share a little bit more of what that means right here. This was inspired actually by Steve Blank. If you haven't read his stuff, definitely pick up his books. Steve Blank is an authority on startup methodology. He's one of the first people I read when I came out to the Valley. And he does a great job of differentiating a problem and a need because they're quite different. So when you think about problem, it's something that's painful, it's costing you energy, it's costing you time, it's costing you money in some cases. So a problem, for instance, could be, I have challenges getting Peruvian food, high quality Peruvian food in the Valley. And that's a problem. It's simple and basic, but it's a problem that I may have because I spend a lot of time trying to identify what places to get. So it becomes a lot of energy because it's a pain point for me because nothing is nearby. And then there is a need, which is another way companies start, right? They're trying to fulfill a need. And a need really isn't a massive pain point, but it's a need societally that we may have as humans, or a need, for instance, to laugh, a need to connect and have community with people, right? So if you have taken a psych class, you probably saw the Maslow's hierarchy. Those are needs. So when you're thinking about a company that maybe solves a need, like a need for entertainment, that's Netflix, a need for, maybe getting a laugh or wanting community, think TikTok, right? So those, as you can see, aren't these massive pains, but they're fulfilling some type of need. And why did I really hammer in on this issue of problem and need? Because the majority of tech startups fail because they end up never ever properly working on a problem or market need. As you can see, this was a study done. 42% of companies fail because they started likely with a solution, but they weren't really solving a problem that people cared about or fulfilled the need that people cared about. And then follow that by running out of cash. Maybe you ran out of money, or you mismanaged money, and then following that as not having the right team in place, and then competition. But ultimately, as you can see, the numbers are clear. Problem should be your North Star if you're starting a company. Problem or unfulfilled need. Okay, so I'm going to hone that in throughout this because it's literally the North Star on how you should think about your startup idea. And when I think about startup ideas, they're in four categories. So one is that idea that you get when you're in a shower, you wake up, and those are the spontaneous ideas. I'm sure you get a lot of those. I know that I do. Then there are the industry expert ideas. You're working at a company, or let's say you're a teacher, and as a teacher, you realize that grading takes so much time. In fact, it may take 12 hours of your week just on doing grades. So you may have a unique insight about grading or some unique problem that you want to solve. So typically you might come up with this because you're a teacher and you're in that space, you've come up with an industry expert idea. A lived experience is a little similar to that. That's a very personal thing you've lived personally or professionally. And a reverse engineered idea. This is an interesting one, and I see it tends to come up with a lot of folks that are like MBA types or people that are in emerging markets. I also see this a lot in Latin America, where there are people that really just have this passion about wanting to be an entrepreneur, but they don't know what to work on. So they essentially reverse engineer, and they try to identify and are constantly looking for problems or ideas, and then they build around that. So these are kind of these four buckets of startup ideas. Secret number 4. Founders are most motivated when they solve a problem they lived or help customers who they care about. I cannot stress that enough. Remember that first slide when I talked about the secret number 1, which was know yourself? Well, it's important to know yourself so you know who motivates you and who you're inspired to work with. So keep this in mind. Founders are most motivated when they solve a problem they lived or help customers they really care about. This becomes even more important because the reality is when you start a company, it's not a linear trajectory. There are potholes. It's really roundabout. Things are not going to be cookie cutter. They're not going to be easy. It's going to be hard. So you need to have massive motivation in order to get through the real highs and the massive lows that come with starting a company. Because I think sometimes a lot of people want to glamorize startup life. It's actually really difficult. And something around selecting your problem, when you're a company or a startup, many companies like Uber, right? They started with one very focused problem. So take Uber, for instance. Their problem statement was, it's inconvenient to hail a black car. Now they have Uber Eats, they have UberX, they have Uber Pool. But when they started out, they just focused on one, and they were laser focused on one problem, that it was inconvenient to hail a black car, right? Eventually, some companies, as they get bigger, they're going to solve different problems. But at the start, especially this early in your entrepreneurial journey, focus on one thing and focus on doing it well. Secret number 5, right? That was focus on that one problem or the need that also energizes you. Again, I keep honing in this idea that you should be intentional about what it is that you're going to work on, because this isn't a journey that you're going to be on 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 months. This is something you likely will dedicate a decade plus of your life. So here we're going to start getting into the meat of the workshop. How do you find problems and needs? Well, they're pretty much all over the place. If you're anything like me, I'm always just like coming up with ideas or writing them in a notebook. But I often don't execute on all of these ideas, even though, all these problems that I see. And there are many ways that you can systematize. There are literally many, many, many ways, but I wanted to focus us just on brainstorming, which is very simple for us to do. So what I would encourage you to do is to, in the future, after this workshop, spend maybe 3 to 5 minutes in a space that's quiet or conducive to you, just not having a lot of distractions, and start brainstorming. So here are some prompts, some questions that you can ask yourself. What's a problem you've lived? What's a friend constantly complaining about that you hear about? What is really time consuming in your job? What's a massive, massive pain point for you? What's unsettling in society, right? So these are just prompts, but you can make up your own prompts. But what I want you to do is I want you to literally to just start writing as quickly as possible and get out as many, many problems as you can. Don't judge them. So when I first started out, I think I wrote a food cart for Peruvian food. Again, my problem was this issue of wanting to get Peruvian food. And I was judging it, so I started like crossing out. Don't do that. Literally make this a brain dump and just get everything out there, and have a timer and just like put everything out there. No judgments. No one's going to read it. This is just for you, and to be able to start seeing some unique patterns in your thought process. Since we mentioned that our North Star is a problem or filling an unmet need, here is the Maslow's hierarchy that I shared before. So self-actualization, for instance, the desire to become the most one can be. So that is a need that someone may have. A solution to that might be a coaching program or a tech platform where you can identify executive or life coaches, right? But when you're thinking about your brainstorming for problems, use those questions. When you're thinking about maybe you're brainstorming for these unmet needs, you may want to have this Maslow's hierarchy up there and just, again, write down what unmet needs. So this is your homework after going through this workshop. What I, again, recommend the 3 to 5 minutes, don't judge yourself. But what you're going to start seeing, was there a common theme? Or maybe there wasn't a common theme. Was there a problem or a need that resonated or got you the most energized or excited? And what I want you to do is, after you have that list, literally circle or highlight the ones that you were most excited about. Also, the thing is, you want your problem to be very specific versus a very people are hungry in the world. That's a reality, but that's a very big problem. And the reason you want your problems to be very specific is because you want to be able to go out and talk to potential customers about if this is a problem for them. You want to be able to test it out in the real world. So that's why you want to hone in. So remember the Uber example, they could have simply said, we want to make transportation easier for everybody. But they didn't start that way. They started with, it's hard and inconvenient to get one black car, okay? So I wanted to, that's a lot of theory. I know I've been throwing a lot at you. So I wanted to share specific examples of things that kind of came up in my own brainstorming data dump. A problem here, many of you may have this in our audience. It was hard to find makeup foundation. I actually don't wear a lot of makeup, but when I do, I find that my skin color is hard to find foundation for. So I literally would have to try to be a little chemist and put different foundations together. So that was a problem for me. Another, I keep saying, like, I'm just very passionate about my Peruvian food. It was hard getting high quality Peruvian food delivered to me. And then another problem that I saw with friends, because I have a lot of friends who may have gone to boot camps or have non-traditional careers, it was hard for them to get past the initial screen, and they would get looked over for engineering jobs. So as you can see, those are the three problems that I came up with. And what I did in this case, I highlighted, you may circle, the one that got me the most excited, which was the one around these non-traditional engineering candidates getting passed over for developer jobs. But when I first wrote it, what I wrote was non-traditional engineering candidates often get passed over for jobs. And when I realized it wasn't specific enough, so I made it more specific that they get passed over for the initial or the first interview, even getting in the door. And it's not for any job, for developer jobs at tech companies. Again, focus on the problem, be very specific on how you write out that problem, and choose one that you're most excited about. So back to our startup formula, right? We've spent a lot of time now talking about the problem, and now we're going to move over to the customer part. Who is the customer that has the problem? That's the question you should be asking yourself. So because we've gone through the exercise of jotting down all our problems, right? Like we've done here, the next thing you're going to do to fill out basically your startup idea formula is we got to find out who that customer is. So you're going to ask yourself a few questions. Who's the customer for this? So with a foundation, right? Who would have that problem? Could be people that look like me. It could be other Peruvians that have my skin color. Again, you can go through your list, but try to come up with 5 potential customers. And once you do that, the problem that you already identified or circled that you are most excited to work on, then match it up with the customer that also gets you excited. Like, who do you want to serve, right? Who do you want to be helpful to? And put them together. So here's an example, right? With the non-traditional engineering candidates getting passed over for initial screens for technical jobs, I realized that there could be 4 customers, right? Or 5 customers, excuse me. The non-traditional candidate, they have the pain point because they're not getting the job. The recruiters, because the recruiters may have pressure on them to find folks, so they may be missing out on this channel. The diversity and inclusion hire who cares about non-traditional hires, the hiring manager who probably has the biggest issue with this because they need talent, and the tech company overall because they're missing out on amazing, incredible talent that is being underestimated and overlooked. But in this case, I was like, who do I care about the most, or who do I feel I can influence the most? For me, it was the hiring manager. So that's why I matched those 2 up. And then the last part of our 3-part startup idea formula is the solution. So how does your company solve this problem for a specific target customer segment? So we've already picked our problem. We paired it up with the target that we're excited about. But now we need to think about solutions. So this next step is, ask yourself the following question: how can X company solve this problem? And the way it can be solved could be through an app, it could be through a product, it could be through a service. But write down a bunch of things and try to see if you can get to 10, and then go through the process and picking out the solution that gets you just the most amped. And then you end up putting them all together. So in this case, the solution I came up with was an anonymous technical interviewing platform, right? Now we have problem plus customer plus solution, which is our startup idea formula. And now what we're going to do is we're going to convert all this into an actual statement. We're going to take the formula and make it a statement. And essentially, if you want, you can just take a picture of this. Company X helps or solves or fulfills, insert the problem for this particular customer by this solution. And that, my friends, is your startup idea, in a sense. It's not going to be grammatically perfect, and that is okay. So please don't judge it. So in this case, I know the grammar is off, but I'm going to share it with you regardless. Company X helps non-traditional engineering candidates not get passed over for developer jobs for hiring managers by providing them an anonymous technical interview platform. We could probably play around with the language, but all I wanted to get you here to is going through this process of brainstorming, figuring out your problem, matching it up with the customer that gets you excited, and then matching it up with a solution that makes sense. And then you have the startup idea. So that's it. That's the formula. Now we made it into a statement or a sentence. You can fix all the grammatical issues, but you may go through this process a few times and have a few startup ideas. And that's what I want to encourage you to do. Because what comes next is doing this on your own time and going and refining this process. Figure out when you are the most creative, where you feel that you can brainstorm. If you want, I used to actually keep a problem journal, because remember, we lead with a problem first. It's problem, customer, solution. And I decided to literally carry one of these in my bag. If I had an idea, I would write if I had a problem, I would write the problem down. And then from there, I would try to create my startup idea with the three components, which are problem, customer, and solution. And again, you have to go through a process of testing all those out. That's called customer discovery. We're not going to cover this here. That is another workshop in itself. But all I wanted to get us to do together is just come up with a systematic way to come up with your startup idea. And then this is the last part of this session, is how do you decide which one you want to work on? And here's what's really exciting to know. It's what matters to you. So a lot of folks, when they meet me as an investor, they're like, Caro, is this a good idea? Should I be working on this idea? I am never going to tell you that your idea is a good idea or a bad one. I think I'll have a perspective. Do I think it could get to the scale that I need it at as a venture capitalist? But I'm never going to judge your idea. That's up to you to do. And that's why I created this workshop for folks in our community to kind of go through their process of doing that on their own. So this is now part 2 of this session, which is our startup idea validation. So why is evaluating your startup idea important for you? Because it's an important skill, because you can have a startup idea and then over time the idea changes, or you have something like COVID, right? So I have friends who were in the travel industry, and then they had to take a step back and go through the process that we just discussed of coming up with startup ideas and then evaluating which ones made better sense for them. And it's worked for them, so I know that this process works. And what tool can you use? There are many tools, but I'm going to share one, which is almost like a scorecard. Again, this is just a guidepost. There are no absolutes. It's just a way to help you organize yourself. And the way I think about this scorecard, literally, I would just draw something up or put it in a Google spreadsheet and type out these indicators. So when I think about indicators, I bucket them into categories. So you have founder, idea, fit. Basically, is this founder, do we believe that this founder is the best founder for this particular startup idea? And what indicators do I think about that could be telling for me to find that out, or for myself? And in this case, this is a question that I think is important to ask ourselves. Do we have the financial stability to start this company? I know when I left school, I had a crap load of debt, and I still went to try to start a company because I thought I would be able to raise money on an idea that did not work out. I hustled, found another way, but ask yourself, do I have the financial runway to be able to do this even part-time, or do I have, 6 to 9 months of cash in the bank so I can take time off and really work on this without stress or other financial responsibilities? Do you have the ability, okay, to build this on your own, okay? If it's something that's software related, are you a coder? Can you code? Do you have people in your network that can help you with that? Do you have a strong network of developers that can help you build a solution? Do you have experience? So for instance, if I wanted to start a company in education, I actually had worked at an education, at a charter school network. So I had experience in that network, so I could kind of check that box. But these questions or these indicators are important for you to kind of assess, if I have to prioritize one of these many startup ideas, which one is going to make the best sense for me to work on now? So continuing with this idea of founder fit, I also want you to take into consideration, do you have access to your first customers? So what do I mean? Are you able to text, WhatsApp, call? People rarely call, email, I don't know, target 1 to 5 people that can be users of your product. Can you readily and quickly access them? Do you have a secret superpower, an insight into this problem that maybe nobody has? So for instance, I have a friend that has worked in gaming for years and is working on something in the space, and it's super unique because they spent 10 years and they've identified a problem that most people wouldn't have thought of, but they have that insight because they've been in the space. And do you have a genuine passion for the idea? I actually might change that word, maybe an obsession that you constantly feel like you got to solve it, that this is like your life's work or your legacy. It's not just something like, oh, I'm going to get up and, try to figure it out, but it's something bigger that's driving you. So ask yourself around these categories, these questions, right? What I'm trying to do is, they're forcing function questions so you can start prioritizing. And then lastly, of the final indicators is, we talked about the founder piece. Is this founder the right one for this particular startup idea? And then, what's the potential of this idea? Is this like something that is really painful or an unmet need that, when people hear it, or a customer that you're talking to hears it, they physically feel it, they have emotion behind it? Are people willing to pay? Because at the end of the day, there have to be people who purchase your product. Otherwise, you don't have a business if no one is able to pay. Are there payers out there? What is the market potential? You could quickly research if this market, like say education, is it a growing market right now with COVID? It's growing. And if you're in a growing market, it means that you will grow with it. Whereas maybe like the toy market is starting to tank. So that might not be the best market for you to go in. What is the level of competition? I always, a lot of folks are like, oh, the market's too crowded. I'm okay with a lot of competition if you want to work on a startup idea in what I call a crowded space. That's okay, as long as what you're creating is like 10 to 15 to 20 times better than what exists out there. And then is there a frequency of this pain or problem you're solving? Is it like a daily thing? Is it a monthly thing? Is it a yearly thing? And then is there regulation in the market? Sometimes like industries such as healthcare or even education in the K-12 space have regulation around privacy or a lot of regulation. So if the idea that you picked, is it heavily regulated? Think through that. Don't be afraid to go into a space that's heavily regulated, especially like if you know regulation. But again, what I want to do is have you just be thoughtful on how you think about these things. So before I close on the scorecard, what I would like you to do, as I said, you probably set up a grid on paper, or you put a Google spreadsheet, put down all these 12 indicators, and maybe for each one have a rating of 1, 2, or 3, okay? So let's take, for example, let me pick one right now, experience working in the sector. And I am going to pick education as my sector. So maybe 1, and this is up to you. I want you guys to do the 1, 2, 3 categories. Maybe 1 is I have no experience. So it's 1 equals no experience. 2, I have some experience because I was maybe like a student teacher or did something indirectly with education, or maybe worked, maybe was a tutor. And 3, I've worked in ed tech and I'm starting an ed tech company. So for each of these, try to create your own scale, right? When you're asking yourselves questions around these categories, and make a 1, 2, or 3. And then each one has a score, and then I want you to tabulate them. And then based on the tabulation, that is going to be a potential indicator of which startup idea you should prioritize. Again, this is not definitive. It simply means that I want you to look at this in a more systematic approach. And it's just a way to give you a reflection on what it is that excites you. So if you can, so I want to close up with number 1, we know that the startup idea is a formula, right? It's problem or unmet need plus the customer plus the solution. You can take that formula and convert it into a statement, right? You went through a process of brainstorming to get to your problem. Then you identified the customer by asking yourself, who are the 5 potential customers? And then you went through a process of identifying 10 potential solutions. But make sure they're things that excite you, that energize you, that you're motivated by. And then once you have your list of all these different startup idea statements, you're then gonna go through this process of putting together your little spreadsheet and then tabulating. And that, my friends, is how you can systematize identifying what you should focus on. If this is something that you're excited about or want to learn more, this was just a nugget that I wanted to share with you. Feel free to go to my website. I'm entertaining the idea of maybe doing a small pilot with 10 or so folks that I can coach, if that gets you excited to get to the point where you're doing the idea concept and working with a group and getting it to a potential prototype. I'm exploring that. So if that gets you excited or amped, feel free to reach out to the website. Grab me on Twitter at Huaranca. There's my @ And lastly, remember to walk into your magnificence. If you really want to start a company, if this is important to you, then do the work. Go through this, go through these exercises, keep your little problem journal, get to know yourself, and just aim for the stars. So excited to be with you, and feel free to reach out. Ciao. Hello, everyone, and I am so excited to be here with Alejandro Guerrero. I will have him give a little bit more of a formal introduction, but I'm super, super excited to have you all meet him today. Alejandro, can you tell us a little bit about who you are?
Yeah, first, thanks, Carolina, for having me here, and congrats on the event. It's a pleasure to be a part of this. Sure, so look, I'll tell you a little bit of my personal kind of story, and then we can go into, venture and the diversity writer. On a personal level, so I'm a first-generation Mexican-American. I was born and raised down in San Diego, grew up in a city called Chula Vista. 1 foot of mine was in Tijuana, 1 foot of mine was in San Diego. My parents, though, that total tried and true, immigrant story. My mom dropped out of school, 6th grade, dad, 7th grade. I grew up pretty poor. Went to public schools my whole life. Then I got into UCLA, went there. I was kind of the beginning of understanding that I knew nothing of the world like I thought I did. Made my way through, finished up in 2007. So pretty terrible timing, because a year later, the world went into a global financial crisis. I was working in the finance world. I'd lost my job. And then in 2009, started a company. So that began 7-year journey of being a startup founder, 3 years with the first company, 4 years with the second company. The first one was a live streaming media tech play, and the second one was a B2B messaging platform. I had no idea what I was doing. Didn't grow up around entrepreneurs, had no idea about this whole startup world. Had the fortune of running into a French entrepreneur who had lived in the Bay, worked in startups, and timing when we linked up in late 2008 about what he wanted to do around the record space, the media space. And I had worked in record labels during school, so I understood that, but not startups. He knew startups. We put it together, and it was fortune, right? Like fortune is kind of what brought me to tech. I wanted to work in the music industry, so that didn't happen, and I'm here, and it's funny how things work out. Spent 3 years there, made every mistake you could possibly imagine after raising capital, because I, didn't know better to think that capital would solve my problems, and it doesn't. It compounds them, right? You really have to know what you're doing. You have to build the right investor group. You have to build the right advisors, the right mentors. There's so much more nuances that go into it beyond the capital. And I didn't know that. No one told us that. So, the second company, B2B messaging, happened pretty quickly. Was offered cash to move to Southeast Asia and do something between there and LA. But I went back to UCLA to make a network, right? Because I was like, okay, cool. I need to meet people that I'm going to be comfortable asking for advice. And the people that I met as a founder in the first company during that process of the first year and a half were not diverse. We're the kind of typical ex-banker, never built a company, never done anything, never sacrificed. So not that there's anything wrong with that, but it was, I found nothing to relate to those folks. And so it was really hard to find a way to like communicate and feel comfortable to ask the stupid questions that I didn't know. But there was no reason that I should have known them, right? Because I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't come from this world. My mom and dad were not executives at IBM or Dell or any of these other places that you hear a lot from folks that come from privilege and wealth. So met Michael, fourth generation entrepreneur, 3-time founder. His failed, sold a company, took one public, had ran it as a public company CEO for 10 years, had just sold it off to a private equity firm, and was committing 3 to 4 years of his life to build a community now around the UCLA ecosystem. So started to volunteer for him, helping mentor younger founders as I was building my company. And then in 2015, I said enough, because I was seeing the rise of LA, everything that needed to be there that wasn't there when I was starting in 2009. And I was ready to really be full-time back and do my third startup back at home. So resigned as a CEO, moved back home, and then luck and timing. Right at the time as I was ready to do my third thing, Michael and I got together. He told me he was now ready to leave UCLA, and instead of starting a fourth software company, he was going to create a venture capital fund called Outco Ventures. We talked about, the approach, which is similar to what we were doing at UCLA. And he's like, I'm talking to you because I wanted to see if you can help me raise some capital. Sure. So started doing that for him for a couple months. Organically, we were not working together, but we had spent so much time with each other, right, as a volunteer, that we had a good rapport. So it felt like we were already partners. And maybe I should have read into that, because, a few months later, he sat me down and said, hey, why don't you join me full-time here and be my partner, and let's build a franchise together from the ground up. So it, lucky, right? Like very lucky. Now, obviously I did a lot of hard work over the last, years to put myself in a position, meet folks, but you can never control opportunities like that. You just have to be ready. And I can't say here and say that I was ready as an investor, because I wasn't a management consultant. I wasn't a banker. I'm not an MBA. I'm not an engineer. I'm just a startup guy, right? Know-it-all, jack of all trades founder. But VC is really an apprenticeship model. And when someone's willing to put in the time and the effort to teach you what you don't know as you keep going, right? There's a set of skills there that they believe you have, and that they can teach you the rest. And if you can learn quick enough and to keep up, which I could. So flash forward, we now over the last 5 years, we've raised a 20 million fund one, a 23 million fund two, so a few more million in SPVs. We invested now in almost 30 companies, 22 in the first fund, 8 here in the second fund. Phenomenal, right? Phenomenal founders like Richie Serna at Phoenix, Jay and Daniel of Audit Board, Alex Cantor at Ordermark, Shirley at Narrative, an outstanding group of individuals that, for me, it's been honestly the life pleasure to be in this seat. Being a steward of capital is unlike anything else in this world, I feel. It is an ultimate privilege to be able to manage a pool of money and you feel a sense, obviously there's a fiduciary and a sense of responsibility, but you want to do something different. While you're shooting for that alpha, you want to be different, and you have to understand the dynamics of what's happening in the world. And when I looked in the mirror, I said, I'm not going to go try to be like everybody else. I'm not going to wear a sweater vest. I'm not going to wear Allbirds. I'm going to be me. I'm going to be myself. I'm going to tell my story. I'm going to be open and honest and real about the struggles that I've been through. And I'm going to go find diverse founders that can relate to that. And that was a strategy that has worked out so far to date.
That's amazing. Well, I really thank you so much. I think it's so important to be authentic. And sometimes in our communities in this sector, people don't share their kind of lived experience. So I totally resonate with a lot of your story, having immigrant parents, and also
Right.
having like 1 foot in like Peru, 1 foot in the States. Sometimes I'm like, what am I or not? Public school
Right.
kid. And also, you know, trying to make my way in venture as myself.
And then if you're kind of like in that position, then your family becomes your responsibility as well, which we've had that conversation.
Yeah,
right?
we
The
have.
responsibility we feel on our families, and how you take that on from such a young age, that a lot of folks don't have to do that, right, for whatever their life circumstances are. But a lot of us that get into this world, we kind of find ourselves where we're the breadwinners for ourselves, and usually for some other individuals as well. So that all of this impacts what we do in life, our decisions, the risk that we're willing to take.
So let's talk about that. Starting a fund is another risk, right? And having, myself as an aspiring fund manager, and I'm sure there are a lot of folks here on the other end that are watching us, what's your guidance to them in terms of, going at it? Because I know that you are now in a few funds. There's a lot of learnings, right? And I'm sure like you've gone to war and back, and there's some scars probably. So can you share just a few, maybe 2 or 3 things for guidance for folks?
Yeah, I can share some framework of what my partner told me early on that would make me successful in venture, and then 3 key things that are the answer to these questions, are what help you get capital from LPs. But to keep it fairly simple, there's 3 things that are going to make you very successful in venture capital. Well, 4, but three, right? So you got to be able to find great deals. So having developed a network of deals that are incredible founders coming out of industries, trying to change the game, right, in a very different, unique way. But finding those deals isn't enough. You got to win those deals. So what is it that you and your partners, whoever you're doing it with, what inherent strengths do you have? Take a look in the mirror and say, what is it that I want to compete with, right? Do I want to walk in the room and compete with all the big funds at demo day at YC? Because you can, but how are you going to win when someone can throw a lot of money and everything else, and you might not have that at your disposal? So be honest about who you are, your strengths, and wear those with pride. And then the third thing is you got to be able to raise money, right? So, if you can do the first 2, you can have a great career in venture capital, but you need to do the third one to be a fund manager, to build a franchise. And then the fourth one is obviously, support your founders along the way, right? So you have to find a way to balance each of those together as you're going out to raise your fund, trying to figure out who are the LPs. Then you're going to realize that none of them want to talk to you because you're raising too small a fund. Then you're going to realize.
Remind us what an LP is for some people in the audience.
Yeah, a limited partner. So, these LPs will vary. They can be as high level institutional as endowments from universities or public pension funds. They could be family offices, which is basically a family that has a lot of wealth, and they professionalize those services, usually with a team of individuals that are helping manage that cash into different asset classes. And then the more noticeable one that you see in emerging managers and micro funds is, these like individual high net worth individuals, right? So people that have gone on to make a lot of money in their careers, they're not probably sitting on, $200 million of cash, but they have enough capital to, be an accredited investor, be involved, and they want to get in the game. So your job as an emerging manager is to triage between those. Personally, I would recommend you to focus mostly on the family offices and the high net worths. The institutionals will take the meeting. They likely will never give you the money in their first fund. I'm not going to say never happens because there are exceptions, but you can't plan for the exception. You got to plan for more of the grinded out process.
Got it.
And then, yeah, please.
Oh, I was just going to say, I wanted to make sure we had time to go into this initiative that you started. Can you tell us, obviously we know that there's a lot of gaps in terms of wealth and who's on the cap table, right?
Yeah.
What investors even get access to particular deals, and the limited funding that goes to underrepresented people of color, right? And even less probably in underrepresented first-time fund managers. So you launched this initiative around a diversity rider. Can you share with the audience what was the inspiration for it, and tell us a little bit more in details?
So the diversity rider, the moment of inspiration was when George Floyd got murdered. And that weekend when the riots were happening and we were on lockdown in LA and I was sitting on my couch watching all of this unfold, I started crying because it was a moment that you know, if you're a person of color, you can think about all the different times that you've been overlooked, that you felt systemic racism, where you didn't get the promotion or you didn't get hired or whatever you want to call it in between there, right? That moment was like sort of like a come around moment for all of us, because you could feel that like that knee was almost like that knee of racism and systemic inequality pressing down on all people of color that just want equal opportunities, but we can never get them no matter how hard we fucking try. Sorry for my language.
Oh, that's good. Keep it real, bro.
So I said, okay, cool. It's time to do something different. And I'm not here. I know people are going to do programs and office hours and scouting and all these things, which are great. Not bashing them, but those have an endpoint. Like I put that into the bucket of like almost like donation based, because there's an endpoint. I say donation based because when you donate money, you donate and you pay attention for like 15 or 20 minutes and then you move on. But when you make an investment, like when you make an investment with an expectation for a return, that's a very different dynamic, right? So when you're invested on the cap table of a company, it doesn't matter if it's 5K, 10K, 5 million, you're going to want a return, right? And your level of attention automatically changes because of the way that relationship was built. It wasn't built off a 15-minute phone call, best of luck. It's, I'm actually giving you my money and now I want to get a return on this. So I'm going to do everything I can. I'm going to open doors. I'm going to pick up the phone. I'm going to help you strategize, all within time and means, right? But the more folks that have these experiences of success and of their journey that are willing to share that with founders, then if you surround founders that are diverse with those individuals, that gives them access to people that they probably never had before, different sets of skills, different networks to tap into for the various things that we need to do all at the same time as we're building companies. So for me, that was going to happen through the term sheet, because it's the one moment in time where us as venture capitalists have the ability to influence what happens in that. It's not ultimately our decision because it's the founder's company, it's their process. You know, we are fortunate if we get to lead the round, but the point of embedding the term sheet or the diversity writer's boilerplate language into your term sheet is that it's there, right? So when you meet a company and a founder, you're like, great, I want to invest. Let me get out my boilerplate term sheet so I can ask the questions that I need an answer to before I issue to you. The same way you have to ask how much money, at what price. You should be asking, cool, if this is going to be a round of $2 million and the most I can write is $1 million, that means we got $1 million left over. That means, how do we think about what diverse individuals or fund managers or whoever that are not currently being represented between you as the founding team and us as your lead investor, who's missing, and how do we find them and how do we bring them in? Because the more diverse networks you have, the better likely a better chance of success you're going to have for a large positive outcome. And so that's what it's about, right? You know, how you do it per deal, it depends on each deal in and of itself, whether it's a percentage or a dollar amount, whether you do it all together in the first close, whether you do a first close on your money and then leave a second window open to find those other additional diverse investors to bring into the mix. It's up to you. But that's not going to happen because you wish it to happen. You have to put in the work, right? And so that's why, you know, when the funds that have signed up to the writer, we're making that pledge and commitment to embed it in our term sheets so that every single time we do a deal, it is a conversation that we are having. And look, if you're doing 6-7 deals a year and you start multiplying the number of firms that are getting involved, that's making a real impact, because not all you know, the reality is not all the time we're going to see the founders that are getting money being diverse. We know that there's a lack of money going to diverse founders. But just because it's not a diverse team doesn't mean you can't get it right on the other side with a diverse co-investor to bring into the mix and still have every deal have diversity being represented on it and moving the industry forward. Now, obviously, the best case is when you're hitting it on both sides, right? Diverse team, diverse investors, bringing it all together. You know, you're the standard, because that's what it really should be. No deal should be getting done without having diversity being represented on the cap table, because at the end of the day, that is where the generational wealth is created. It's not made by having a cup of coffee and helping somebody for 15 minutes. It's made by being a part of that journey for years, having some skin in the game, and then participating in the wealth creation.
Yeah, so I really just appreciate you being so unapologetic on pushing the diversity and inclusion conversation, but it's also, again, a generational wealth issue. We don't talk about that. We don't really talk about it. And I think we have to, all of us together and united as community, this is why we're here at LTX Fest, push that conversation. So keep it real, because you're keeping it real and dropping gems.
If there's one more thing I can just add before we go, it's one of the big things that I'm hoping for the Latino community, the Latinx community here in the coming years, is that we take our level of support to a new level, right? Sharing deals, sharing LPs, being open and honest about how we help each other out, emulating more what we're seeing in the Black community. Certainly what's incredible about the Jewish community, we need to start taking some of those tips and implementing them into ours, because we're behind, right? We are behind. There's a lot fewer Latinx individuals that are in the game, not representative of the country, right? But you know, if we're not doing these things and being aware of how do we continue to help each other out, then we're not going to have enough of that momentum to really take off, because it takes a village to pull this off. And there's more than enough room for plenty of diverse managers to get involved. Don't think that you're going to be the one Latino or Latina that's going to make it, and so you got to cut everybody else's throat. That is a lie that we have all been conditioned to believe, because we don't see diversity in the industry. Don't believe it. Don't be a victim to that. Help each other out and do the right thing.
Yeah, no, I'm so happy we honed in on that, and you made that point, because sometimes our community is we work in silos. And again, this is the ethos of this conference, is unidad, bringing us together, because stronger together, we can push a movement and amplify our voices. This is about helping one another, because if one goes up, we all go up together.
We all go up.
I think in the past, you're right. I think people are like, well, it's me. Let me keep my little circle for myself. No, folks, like if you're hearing it here, you're hearing it from two people in the industry. There's enough to share. So let's just keep opening up doors, because it's better for all of us to be united on that.
And the more of a two-way street we do that, the more you're going to see back, right? You have to believe in that. And it's not going to happen right away. Don't think because it didn't happen in the first one, you should stop. It's a commitment. It's a behavioral change, but if you're willing to do the work, I do believe you're going to see those positive outcomes.
And then my last question is, what surprised you when you started pitching this rider to folks? And let's keep it real. We don't have to name names of folks, but I think it's really important for us to just get a sense of if there was pushback.
Yeah, no, there definitely was. I'm not going to front. There definitely was pushback. I talked to firms big and small, some that are billion-dollar multi-stage, some with emerging managers, and everything in between. Originally when I started the writer, I was shooting for, let's get 5% and pro rata as like a standard, because I know the importance of having a good amount of equity.
Can you tell people what pro rata is? I just want to make sure, because everyone's at different levels.
Sure. The legal right to be able to participate in the next round, to continue to put more money to maintain your percentage stake in the company. So, they were like, some of these bigger funds, it's like, oh yeah, no, percentages are not going to work, because it's, they were sharing with me that at the Series A, because it's so big, competitive, and there's so many big funds now, that we're not really getting to our averages at the A. Funny enough, everybody thinks we are, but we're not. So that's why we have to go earlier to the seed. And so then it becomes a challenge, because we're trying to, so I was like, oh wow, like I didn't know any of this stuff, that it was like that. So, every 10th of a point matters, somebody mentioned, but they're like, but I'd be down to do like a dollars basis, like 100 or 250K. I was like, okay, so let's have a variable in there. Then, over time, it was clear that the pro rata portion wasn't going to work because it's basically the same reason as the first. I was like, okay, as much as I know that that's important for us, what's important here is that we get something across the line. It's never going to be perfect, but we got to get something across the line. So I removed that barrier. And then just in like the conversations, I was learning more about some of the nuances of fundraising, how, you know, the bigger LPs will, you know, a lot of the really big LPs don't really go out and do the work. You know, we might believe that they're out looking for diverse managers. They are not. I'm sorry to say, but they're not. You know, it's still a network-driven system where they're kind of waiting for somebody that they've been backing for a very long time to make an intro to one person of a diverse background, and they go meet them and they want to invest in them and they want to underwrite based on the recommendation of a big GP that they've already invested in. So the GPs are like, well, no, because if looking for who to put the blame on in case it goes sideways. And so it's in this system where we're still viewed as an exception. Like, oh, we're going to invest in emerging managers and we're going to have an exception by having, you know, this one Latinx or Black individual, you know, in the mix earlier than what we normally do. And I'm over that shit. Like, I don't want anyone's money. I'm no one's fucking exception. So fuck you and fuck your exceptions. If I'm not in your main pool, then I'm not interested because I'm no different than anybody else. I'm going to deliver better returns because my deal flow is different. My attitude is different. The way that I'm doing this whole thing is not homogenous. And you just have to understand that. And if you don't, that's cool. Watch everybody else make money as we keep going on our way.
No, that's important. And I think, again, so if there's so many takeaways from this is own our identity and walk into our magnificence and be proud of all these experiences that we have. Like, let's not shy away, be unapologetic.
Wear it on your sleeve. Like, be proud. You will find that if you do that, you are going to set a more comfortable stage for every founder you meet. And you're probably going to start hearing them tell you things like, oh my God, you're never like any other VC I've met. Oh my God, like you're actually a human. Oh my God, let me tell you about the problems I've been through. And then you might even start to see some of them cry because that's how much they're holding it in because they feel like they can't share what they're really going through with anybody because if they do, they're going to be looked down upon or people are going to pass on them. And that's just the most heartbreaking thing that I know exists. So I always make it a point that when I meet founders, I go first. I set the stage with my story of growing up super poor and everything else in between, because I want them to know that I'm not a typical VC. In fact, I still kind of hate that. I hate the term VC because I don't feel like one. I feel like I'm a founder still because we built this thing from the ground up and we're doing it our way. But we're just shaping it to the way that we believe it should be done.
Well, closing on that, let's all kind of shape the world that we want to create for ourselves. And you've shown by example in leadership of being able to do that by going on the trajectory, starting this fund, and then also pushing the conversation on this diversity rider. So thank you for all you do for the community. Thank you for being part of this and part of this movement that we're trying to build, because this is me and many other people. This is a labor of love for all of us. So Thank you for being with us and showing up.
Well, thanks for everything you're doing, for putting in the hard work. It's putting in the hard work like right now and over time that we start to see, that we start to build real connections and real movements, and you're doing that. So thank you for having me be a part of this. It was a pleasure, and I hope to do it again soon.
Okay. Ciao, ciao. Take care. Bye-bye.